Hey, and welcome back to The Artificial DM. This story was sent in by Storyteller by Night. They happen to share the story about the weeb who played the vampire girl in this video here. It's not related to this story, however, it's also a good story. This is going to be another Vampire the Masquerade story. That's enough of me rambling, so we will go ahead and get into this RPG horror story. I am the Knight. Thanks again, Storyteller by Night, for sharing your tale. I'd like to share with you another horror story from the world of Vampire the Masquerade. I'm much more often a storyteller than I am a player, and this particular story comes from a game I was running. Now, when I run a tabletop game, I usually like to stack the group with my friends, because I know these people are talented role players who are fun to play with. Then I'll usually bring in one or two new people to mix things up, and have a chance at meeting even more talented role players who are fun to play with. This is a story about one of those players I took a chance on. On this occasion, my vampire game was set in the emerging Middle Ages of Europe, 989 AD to be specific. The story began in a monastery in the midst of the Saxon wilderness, what is geographically today East Germany. The main character started out as human, and over the course of uncovering a horrible vampire conspiracy at the heart of the monastery, called the Cainite Heresy, found themselves embraced as vampires, either directly into the heresy or by the vampires who came to the monastery to oppose it. I thought it'd be a solid way to kick off a fun Dark Ages chronicle, especially since everyone could move to the nearby city of Mageburg once the events at the monastery had been resolved. The player I'm talking about told us his name was Bogdan, and he was really passionate about role-playing games. I had a good first impression of him. He wanted to play the abbot of the monastery and eventually be embraced into Clan La Sombra, a clan of vampires who wield living shadows as a weapon, with a discipline called obtenebration. But even more than that, Bogdan loved blood magic, which is normally supposed to be pretty rare. He explained to me that he wanted to learn a form of blood magic called umbrathurgy, which is essentially delving even deeper into the extra-dimensional void of shadow from which the La Sombra draw their obtenebration powers. I thought this was kind of weird, and intense, and ambitious, but I'm always willing to hear a player out if they're excited about something. Bogdan's concept didn't end there. He also wanted to take a 5-point flaw for his character. For reference, there are pretty much no flaws higher than that. This is functionally as bad as it gets, called Scion of Shadow, or something like that. I can't remember the name exactly. What this means is that, as a result of becoming a vampire, that extra-dimensional void I talked about wraps around his body and turns him into a walking extension of it. He gets some minor benefits from being a walking, monstrous manifestation of darkness, but mostly, it just sucks. I strongly discouraged him from taking this. I almost outright said no, because what this means is he'll effectively be unable to function around mortals. No one can look upon him and not know he isn't a monster. Even other vampires aren't going to want anything to do with him. I explained this to him in as exacting detail as I could, but Bogdan was adamant. He wanted this flaw and his shadow magic, and that was his character. Oh boy. So one of our other players had this character who was a child vampire, a character who was accidentally embraced. She was a Saxon peasant girl, only about 9 or 10, who was drained to death by a hungry elder vampire who invaded her family's hovel. Her father tried to protect her, and in the ensuing violence, a droplet of blood from the attacking vampire fell into her dead character's mouth and woke her up into undeath. The vampire responsible decided to grudgingly feed her bastard and take her along after killing the rest of this poor family. It was a really horrific, interesting origin for a character. The elder in question was a character from the Vampire the Masquerade canon called Catherine de Montpellier, originally a French noblewoman representing the courts of love, vampires from medieval France, and acting as ambassador to the Fiefs of the Black Cross, vampires from medieval Germany. Catherine was not having a good time of it. Her whole entourage had been previously ambushed and ripped apart by rampaging werewolves, and it was only by virtue of her being a powerful elder vampire that she alone survived. Catherine was on her way to Mageburg when it happened, and attacking our player's family was a way to replenish the blood she'd spent defending herself from werewolves. Catherine is really powerful. She's an elder vampire. This was made clear to everyone at the table, in theory, but in a very abstract way. Like, they'd never seen her use her powers. She's much more of a Parisian courtier rather than some howling barbarian after all. So the prologue period of the Chronicles does take 5 or 6 sessions to complete, and the whole time, Bogdan is chomping at the bit to get his Shadow Vampire Abomination guy. He kind of checked out of much of the roleplay before that, and I always got the impression he was impatient with just being a boring human. I don't know how relevant this is, but Bogdan had a really thick Eastern European accent, and hearing him talk all the time about when he gets umbraturgy in that accent was kind of funny. When the monastery literally collapses and is a smoking ruin in the aftermath of the battle with the heresy, our players and Catherine are standing outside on the road, leading off into the forest toward Mageburg. And there's Bogdan, freshly embraced in all his glorious shadow deformity. He had spent the last 3 weeks telling us all about how he was going to take everything over. He's so excited to finally be a vampire. He has his shadow powers and his umbraturgy and is going to rule Europe. Catherine is disgusted by his appearance and declares she won't be seen traveling with a freak. And Bogdan immediately says to her, "Watch your tongue!" Little thing about Catherine, she has absolutely had it. She left Paris, got attacked by werewolves, accidentally embraced a little girl, who she's responsible for now, ran into the Cainite heresy, and now has to walk barefoot along a muddy road to meet with Prince Jurgen in a torn dress. And now, she is being sassed by some weird, newly embraced whelp. The whole table goes quiet when Bogdan says this. Catherine calmly turns to look at Bogdan's character and asks, "Excuse me, what did you say?" Bogdan is not at all perturbed. He squares up with Catherine and says, "You heard me. I am the knight." Except, in Bogdan's accent, it came out, "I am the knight." Catherine immediately uses the enormous power in her blood to augment her arms to be strong as iron bars, and her fists like rocks. This little 110-pound French noblewoman, and with superhuman speed, closes the distance between herself and this big, scary shadow vampire monster, and punches him dead in the face. He hits the ground like a sack of shadowy crap, and she is suddenly on his ass like she owns it. She's got him by the throat with one hand, and is calmly, repeatedly, dropping her fist on the shadow face, over and over again, and everyone else is just standing by, watching this completely horrified. He tried to use his powers to defend himself, but he was already so badly wounded, summoning them was not an option. Bogdan just had to take his beating, and at some point says, "I understand! Please stop!" This living mess of shadow, begging for the integrity of his face, who Catherine is just beating like he owes her rent money in front of everyone. She does not stop. She continues to hit him until he slips into torpor. Basically, when a vampire is so badly wounded, they appear dead but aren't destroyed. They're in a death sleep, called torpor. She drops him in the road, and calmly turns around to begin the trudge to Mageburg, without saying a word to anyone. Everyone is just sort of standing around looking at each other, and then one of the players say, "Well, we can't just leave him here." They knew when daylight came, that'd be the end of him. Mercifully, the group brought him with them to Mageburg. There he was fed elder blood, to be revived and brought before Prince Jurgen, who took one look at his character and said the 10th century equivalent of, "What the hell is that? Get that out of here, before I kill it with fire!" So he was thrown out of the city gates and left to fend for himself in the wilderness. Bogdan's first question to me, once he was on his own, was, "How do I build an army?" And the question totally took me off guard. I'm sitting there trying to figure out how to answer him, when I realize he's 100% serious. I say it's probably not possible, given his appearance and resources. His second question to me is, "How do I take over a castle?" Completely confused, I say that the closest thing resembling a castle in this area is Mageburg itself, and he just got thrown out. Bogdan sulks, kind of put out by my answers, and decides he's going to go to the nearby farm on the outskirts of Mageburg for some easy prey. He has some basic dominate, vampiric mind control, and thinks he can use it to subdue someone and feed. He confronts a farmer, who screams at the sight of him, and Bogdan tries to dominate her. He fails his role. She hauls off and whacks him in the head as hard as she can with a crap-stained shovel she happened to be holding, She'd been working in the sty, and absolutely lays him out with a fantastic roll. He's on the ground. She runs inside, shrieking for her husband, who comes out with a cudgel. But poor Bogdan is a beaten, bloody mass of shadow, limping off into the darkness as fast as he can, smelling of pig crap. Bogdan spends the next couple of hours in the woods, trying to figure out his next move. He needs to get back to the monastery, because all his Umbraturgy books were still back there. He didn't get a chance to grab them before Catherine had a Donnybrook stampede all over his face, so he decides to steal a horse from the same farm. Animals don't like vampires, okay? They don't at all, unless you have the discipline of animalism. They instinctively sense you're a creepy blood-drinking monster. And on top of it, Bogdan is a shadow abomination. He tries to be nice to the horse and get it to let him pet it. I don't even allow him a roll because of all the circumstances against him, and the horse bites the crap out of his hand. Bogdan can't scream because he doesn't want round 2 with the angry milkmaid and her battle shovel. He has to roll to stay quiet, but this horse is chewing his hand like a carrot, and he turns to try to run. The horse won't let his hand go, and what happens is Bogdan fleeing across the farm, running from this horse, and failing every roll to try to get his hand free. Bogdan's antics have totally brought this game to a standstill, and everyone is watching, spellbound, at the most embarrassing failure of a vampire to ever walk the face of Europe. Finally, Bogdan gets free and runs off into the woods. He decides to go back to the monastery on foot. He's badly injured, in lots of pain. His hand is torn up, head bashed in, and he's pretty low on blood. Then he hears a wolf howl. I had already long decided the werewolf pack that attacked Catherine had been tracking her ever since the fight where she killed 2 of their number, and were around Magdeburg. I had made some rolls for them, and poor beaten shadow freak Bogdan is who they find. He hears that howl and starts running like he's in a Benny Hill skit, and sure enough, this pack, all in wolf form, tear out of the woods onto the road and are chasing him in a dead run. He botches, critically fails his athletics roll to run, trips on a rock, and takes another level of bashing damage by hitting his face on the ground. Seconds later, he is torn apart by werewolves. To his credit, Bogdan didn't flip out and get upset at his long string of failures. He didn't want to try to make a new character and left the group, and I can't hardly blame him. He just kept trying anything he could think of, but every choice he made was either the wrong one or he failed spectacularly. To this day, my players shout, "I am the knight," every time they fail a really important role. Thanks for reading, Storyteller by Night. Thank you for sharing your tale. Honestly, this story sounds like the player believed his character was totally badass, because he intentionally built what sounds to be a very broken character. One that wanted power for power's sake. It didn't matter to him that he would have a disadvantage when interacting with humans. He just wanted to be a very powerful character, and he thought he could do whatever he wanted. I am a little confused why Catherine had to go full out and beat this character to death, but I don't know any of the story or canon of Vampire the Masquerade. I've had a huge influx of stories sent in, which is awesome. So if you're one of the people that went ahead and sent in a story recently, I really do appreciate it. Thank you very much. I will be getting around to reading more viewer submitted stories, but it might be a little bit before it gets on the channel. That's going to do it for today. And until next time, hope you feel inspired.